some of you, this may be your first time here at the Eastside Freedom Library. And I think this evening's conversation is really a good example of how we have grown in what we are trying to achieve here. We have just celebrated our 5th anniversary. We now have 20,000 books on the shelves, cataloged, hopefully where they're supposed to be so that we can find them. We do a lot of programming. Last night we had a program discussing the 85th anniversary of the Minneapolis Teamsters strike of 1934. The night before we had a program discussing the history of this building and a book that we have just published. Joseph, come sit with me. You're a hard person to miss. Come and sit with me. Good. It's good to see you. And so we do lots of different things about trying to both explore the intersections of immigration history, labor history, the history of movements for social justice, and also trying to support the building of bridges between communities, particularly here on the east side of St. Paul. And I think that when we started, we really thought our first focus was the white people who have long lived here on the east side after Native Americans were driven out in the early 19th century, so mostly white people of European ancestry. And then the new immigrants who have arrived in the last 30 years from East Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America. And my wife and I, both of us being professors and living in the neighborhood, were concerned that there wasn't much good communication going on between the white people who had lived here for many generations and the new immigrants who were arriving. And my contribution to the concept was, as a historian, that I really believed that if people could get to know each other's stories, that they would discover that they had more in common than different. Beth's contribution as a theater maker and theater professor was to say that using art is a very good way to try to build those bridges. And so we have had poetry readings, visual art exhibits, we've had plays here, so many ways of trying to use art to build those bridges. The more that we have engaged in this process, the more that our sense of the need for bridges has become stronger and stronger, not just because of the idiot in the White House and the damage that he is doing, but also the more we've gotten to know different communities, that we've discovered that it's important to build bridges between new immigrant communities, between the Hmong and the Oromo and also the Dakota and the Ojibwe. Hi, you guys, come on in. I'm just stalling, and here you are. Great. Come on and sit.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so it brings us to something like this evening, and the fact that people who might be perceived by the dominant culture, by white people, as, oh, they're all Africans. You know, I have a friend who has a wonderful project I encourage you to look at online. He has a blog project called Africa is a Country. And he uses this in part to make fun of the misperceptions that the dominant culture has, but also to promote a vision of Pan-Africanism and the ways that, this is a young South African guy, the ways that Africans particularly could use culture and art to build solidarity across the continent. But our understanding that there are very different experiences, and not only different experiences between Ethiopians and Zimbabweans or Somalis and South Africans, but also people who might all be carrying Ethiopian passports and be seen as Ethiopian, but have very particular and importantly different experiences. And as a historian, I believe that immigrants from a diaspora have often played a very positive role in helping to shape politics, both here in the United States and in the countries from which they've come. And so the possibility that we might encourage a conversation here in St. Paul among people from different Ethiopian communities that might then have an impact on the conversations that take place in other places as well as Ethiopia itself. So I have been learning the last 2 weeks since Negesa has been trying to be my teacher. And I've been a so-so pupil. I've been trying to understand. And then Cal and Hannah have also been teachers, correcting me when I use categories that I've borrowed from other experiences and fields and try to squeeze the Ethiopian experiences into the categories that I'm familiar with. And so I look forward to tonight as an opportunity for me to learn and hopefully not only for our brothers and sisters from East Africa to share with each other, but for the rest of us to learn. So that's the kind of background. And those of you who have volunteered to speak tonight, if you would introduce yourselves. And my colleague Clarence and I moved the furniture about 4 times today, trying to decide how we wanted to organize this. And Negesa was particularly interested in our having a video live stream on Facebook, my colleague and friend Carla. And so we were trying to figure out how do we use the video, and how do we make this not just about several experts telling the rest of us what we need to know, but how do we set up the chairs to actually encourage a conversation. So, and also with no idea how many people might come. And here we are, so we should have the conversation.
Peter, excuse
yes,
me,
Carla.
there are 14 people watching now.
Very good, okay. That's good, almost as many as there are here. That's good. And I would tell you all that the video will be available. So one of the things we've learned about live stream video on Facebook is that it's immediately archived so that you can look at it later. And so it will be on the Eastside Freedom Library Facebook page. And Carla then puts it on YouTube because the quality of the video is better on YouTube. And so you can see the Eastside Freedom Library YouTube channel and encourage your friends. Unless you say something that you're embarrassed by and you don't want to see it, you can encourage your friends to look. Hi. So, as I said, those of you who did volunteer to share some thoughts with us tonight, if we could just go around and if you would introduce yourselves. And so, were you a volunteer or?
He is.
Oh, he is?
Oh.
Or Al? Where do we
Al.
start? Start with Al? Although this gentleman seems willing. Yeah.
Well, my name is Alamin Adam. I am from the Eritrean community. Lived in the United States for over 30 years, and I am part of the panel here to present, the Eritrean perspective about the development that's happening in Ethiopia.
Thank you.
My name is Negesa Odo. Last name is Dube, actually. I am from Ethiopia, the Oromo community. An activist.
Thank you.
I am Mahdi Mohammed. I am from Ethiopia in Oromo community, but today I'm not here representing any of this. I'm just representing myself and give my thoughts on the things that we are going to discuss. So currently I work for Department of Human Services in Minnesota. I'm working under healthcare administration. I am the healthcare trainer, policy trainer, and a lot of stuff. So
It's interesting to
Yeah.
know, because for those of us who might think
yeah.
that Ethiopia is complicated, we have not looked closely at the Department of Human Services. So congratulations,
Yeah.
you've gone, as we say,
Yeah.
from the frying pan to the fire. Yes.
Well, you can second me. I worked for the Department of Human Services
Oh.
25 years too, you know.
Uh-huh.
On my way to retire, you know,
Yeah.
even, you know, Mahdi there.
Just that we not think that only people outside the United States are having problems.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Can we ask all of you to speak up because you're not facing us?
Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah.
Great,
Okay.
thank you, okay.
My name is Samuel Teklad. I'm also from Eritrean community in Minnesota. I've been here almost the same as with Haji, 30 years, I believe. And I'm self-employed and try to be active in the community.
Please don't get confused. He said Wadahaji, and that's my nickname.
Oh.
Okay,
Yeah, used to.
okay, thank you, yes. Hannah, are you- No?
I mean,
Please.
I'm here as a participant, not as a presenter. Okay, my name is Hannah Wadacho. I'm a second year PhD student at the University of Minnesota. I have a law and human rights background, and I just came to the US 2 years, or almost 3 years before.
And you're a poet.
Hmm?
And you're a poet,
Yes.
yes.
I'm Kalkidan Molla. I'm from Eritrea, Ethiopia. My background is in physics and mechanical engineering, so I'm not into, but I'm interested in any political progress in Ethiopia as a young active citizen. So today I'm here representing myself as a young concerned citizen on the development in Ethiopia.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
good to say that we all represent ourselves.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
Can
I do want to, please, Hannah.
Yeah, can I say something?
Of course.
So Peter sent us an email a couple of weeks before about this program, and he told us, do you want to represent an Amhara region groups? And we were like, no, we grew up in the cities. We are, both my husband and I are from Eritrea, which is like a city area. So my dad is Oromo and my mom is Amhara. So I can't represent either Oromo or Amhara. We grew up in the city. We are just citizens. So he then corrects the email calling us citizens of Ethiopia. So we are here representing the metropolitan area.
Thank you.
That's one of the issues we're going to talk. So.
Yeah, yeah,
Looking
yeah.
forward.
Yeah, but I also want to mention that Hannah and Cal are involved with this group of poets who come here on the first Saturday of every other month, and they will be here again on August 3rd, and there will be poetry and music and maybe some visual art, who knows?
Yeah, Peter has been really helpful. It'll be our first time presenting here, so every 2 months on the first Saturday. It's been a nice collaboration with Eastside Freedom Library.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. So Negesa, would you like to begin?
Yes, I would like to welcome everyone.
Yes?
Could we ask that he sit in front and speak to us this way? This is
Oh, okay, why don't we
for
do,
the hearing.
yeah, yeah,
You're
so,
talking that way and
Okay.
he's lost.
okay,
Thank you.
sorry.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So I would like to thank everyone for showing up. Tonight we will be discussing about developments in Ethiopia and implication for the Horn of Africa. When I say Horn of Africa, the Horn.
Could you use well, there's a man over
The mic?
here. No.
Okay.
No, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
in the
I
Horn,
just-
we have Djibouti, we have Ethiopia, we have Eritrea, we have Somalia, and so these, I don't know if it includes Sudan
Yes,
or
it
not.
does.
Okay, yeah, these countries are called Horn of Africa. So the situation, Ethiopia being at the middle, a large country with about 100 million population, and being a stable country in that region, from which the United States also usually collaborates and sends army to Somalia when there is instability, send army to South Sudan, and Ethiopia is there at the middle. And in the past, when Eritrea did not secede from Ethiopia, Ethiopia used to have a port and somehow powerful country. So to say a few things about, before I say a few things about situation in Ethiopia and the transition process, usually transitions are not easy. In most countries, transition from authoritarian region to democracy is very difficult. I mean, many countries, there are not as many success stories about that. Many countries has failed. We can mention Yugoslavia, we can mention Burma, how the Rohingya minorities were treated and after the fall of the authoritarian region. So we can say, we can point out that transitions are not easy. There is a bumpy road toward this democracy. So Ethiopia had chances for transition to democracy, had two chances in the past. The first one was in 1974 when students uprised and revolted against the monarchy. We had a monarchy, a system of government called monarchy, where Haile Selassie was the last monarch in Ethiopia. The monarchy system in Ethiopia, they used to trace back their origin to Solomonic dynasty, where they say the first monarch was the son of King Solomon of Israel, and then everybody counts and traces back its own roots to that monarch. Some are not true. We don't know that story anyways, I don't get to that history, but so most kings in Ethiopia, almost all, they trace back their ancestry to Solomon, King Solomon, and Queen Sheba, and then Haile Selassie being the last. When Haile Selassie was toppled by student movement and finally by the military, when the military took over in 1974, one of the two main questions were there. The first one, land to tiller, because of the land, people did not own land. So only authorities, powerful people own land and the rest are tenants. So the question of land was there. And the other one is the question of ethnic equality, and I think the third one is government of the people. Democracy was that. People wanted government of the people and didn't want the monarchy. But the military government that took over, it destroyed the monarchy system. It assumed and adopted communism immediately. And therefore, different factions, the students that revolted and that were leading the movement, they were not organized, therefore there's no way they come to power. So power comes out from the barrel of the gun. The military has the power, and then the students has to form another parties, political parties such as EPRP, Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Front, or Revolutionary Party. Yeah, EPRP, and there is another one, Mason. These are all communist, with a communist ideology, but they tried, but they all failed. So Ethiopia failed to transition to democracy. And then the military ruled for 17 years, and then in 1991, rebel groups fought, overthrown the military regime, came to power. The two major rebels being TPLF, Tigrayan People Liberation Front, and the Eritrea rebel, EPLF, Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and there is also Oromo rebel called Oromo Liberation Front. So these rebels, when they seized the capital, when they controlled the capital, there was a negotiation that took place in London. In that negotiation, they decided to form a government of transitional government. However, the Eritreans soon got their independence. They made through the process of voting for independence, and EPLF left. The rest are TPLF and OLF. They formed a transition government. They were in the transition government. Then TPLF pushed OLF, and then TPLF became another dictator, another Dirk military force, continued in power for 27 years. So from 1991, the first chance, 1974 failed, 1991 failed. After 27 years now, we are in 2018. In 2018, because of 3-4 years of Oromo protests, basically the Oromo movement, and then other Ethiopians also joined the movement. There was a non-violent movement that has taken place in Ethiopia, I can say from 2014 to 2018, which forced the government to change the prime minister. In April 2018, the new prime minister came to power. So now we have a hope of transition to democracy in Ethiopia. Everybody is expecting that. Even though we do expect that, still it's not easy. We have some positive developments since the new prime minister came to power. Tens of thousands of political prisoners were released, and restoration of peace with Eritrea was one of the developments, very progressive and good development. There are the new prime minister and his government welcomed banned political groups. Some are based in, some are in exile, including neighboring country Eritrea. For example, the Oromo Liberation Front. There is a group called the Botsalat rebel groups. They were all invited, and now they have offices in Addis. And there are some also positive steps, such as some proclamations, some laws were dismissed, and we're expecting new laws. There are several developments. However, regardless of that, there are also dissatisfactions. The dissatisfaction is there is ethnic conflict here and there. There are a lot of displacements taking place, and there is a challenge restoring peace and order. So you find there will be conflict in the east, and when government controls that, in the west, another conflict, and there is conflict in the south. For example, today, yesterday, in these days, there is conflict in the south. Some want autonomy, some want to have a region. There are a lot of demands here and there. So we see that there is a failure to maintain peace and order. So there are complex questions such as identity, administrative boundary questions that are causing conflicts. There is also a question of land. There is a dispute over the ownership of the capital at this. There are these questions. And there are contradictory political views. The most important is that there are two major views. One is proponent of ethno-nationalism, multinational federalism, in which the country now is structured in multinational, multi-ethnic federation, which means the federation regions were, the boundary of regions were made based on the language they speak and historical ties and the like thing. Based on those things, ethnic and language based. So there are supporters of this multinational federation, including me. I think for some time we need to maintain, I think that. And there are other groups who say this is really divisive and we don't deserve this. We need like geographical or some other way, because having boundaries based on the language and the like things are not good. I mean, there is another group, which we better have a political system based only on national identity, not ethnic identity. There are these two major views. That's why I mentioned that to our friends when they said they don't represent Amhara. Anyways, they might represent this view. I don't know. I'm not sure, but if they can speak later. So we have these two, and then so the groups that do not accept the multinational federation, they also demand constitutional amendment. But that's the demand on different platforms, discussions, they raise that. Actually, we all agree that there are things to amend from the constitution, but not the core ideas. So the other challenge we have is in countries like Ethiopia, we didn't have a developed democratic culture. Democracy by itself is a culture. You need to, the ideas should go into the people. So there is unless people practice it for some time, it's not easy to have that. We also need institutions, strong institutions, to have democracy, to maintain it, to consolidate it. Otherwise, even you get into democracy again, you go back to authoritarianism or some military system take over. So my recommendation in general is we need to have some models like South African transition from apartheid to democracy, which went through like Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we should strengthen institutions. We even have some problems like there are still armed groups fighting. Some factions of Oromo Liberation Front, for example, they are still they are fighting from the jungle. So there is a need to disarm, dissolve, and reintegrate those into. Unless we go through that, it will also be very difficult. So if we don't have strong institutions, there is no way that we can make government or officials accountable. So we do need institutions, like we need institutions such as the military to be neutral from party politics. We need strong media. We need the judiciary to be somehow independent. That's the only way we can make people in power accountable and working hard. In a nutshell, I can say Ethiopia is at labor. So the labor, someone is at labor. If the delivery goes well, we have a son or a daughter. That can be a democracy, otherwise it can abort. We don't know where we're heading to, but the situation, the impact would be on all the neighbors, and it will impact others, not only Ethiopians. So that's why we need to have this kind of discussion. That's why I recommended this kind of discussions. By this, I even got a new friends which I have never met before. So this discussion will not stop today here. We will have series of discussions in the future. I hope at at least we would add something to the transition process. We will contribute positively. That's my hope. And so thank you very much. I would leave the stage to other friends of mine. We might get back when during the discussion. So,
Great. Why don't you?
I mean, you
How
or
how is this working? Can I ask you a question?
Okay.
Not yet.
We'll have to speak.
We'd like to let everyone have a chance to speak first, please.
okay, yeah, you have your
Yes.
question. We'll get back to it.
Yeah.
Would the Eritreans go, or if?
I think my presentation is a continuation of yours.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Bhakti, please. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Nagesa.
Thank you again. My name is Mahdi Mohammed, just for those who came not late, but very late. Okay, Nagesa has described the whole historical situation and the current situation in a very beautiful way. But just to give you like a hint about my title of my panel is going to be Ethiopia's political elites, aspirations, pragmatism, and implication on the Horn of African region. When I have selected this title, there was a reason. I am a product of St. Paul when it comes to education. I have studied my master's in Metropolitan State University, and the program was Master of Advocacy and Political Leadership, and the professor that I always admired his name was Y. Spano. So he defines politics like how we care for each other. But traditionally, politics is defined like who gets what. So when it is always who gets what, we always have trouble. But how about like focusing on human mind? I mean, how people think. How can change be implemented? So currently, the Ethiopian situation looks like we need more of humans than ideology or principle or whatever you call it. So I will just give you how I will just give you like a background of how our political elites think, because I told you I'm more interested on the human mind than the material possession that we have, whether as a power or politics or whatever. So the Ethiopian elites, when it comes to like the political history of Ethiopian elites, they are more of like people who know a lot about the Bible, but lack the ability to practice it. So this means in 1960s and 1970s, we had one of the great, I cannot really call it great, but historically we call it great revolutionary history, which is like, that was the transition from the feudalism to a modern political ideology, if we can call it modern, because during that time in 1960s, 70s, African countries, most of them, they were in the verge of independence, and most of the elites, they had this notion of socialism. Like to be free, you have to fight like imperialism or something like that. So most of the political culture is coined under isms like imperialism, socialism, capitalism, and so many other like ideological factions. But at the end of the day, having all this political notion or having all this having like the knowledge about these political principles, what they lack to understand, according to my viewers, when I say ism, like who am I? For example, I may be a capitalist, a socialist, or whatever, but in a country that I'm living, does that reality really support my principle, my thinking? Because in an ocean, when you have so many fish that cannot really swim well, then you should be like a good trainer rather than swimmer. So in Ethiopia, historically, what we have lacked was we have intellectuals so high here, but the public is like, when it comes to like awareness, political awareness, not from human perspective, but when it comes to political awareness, the public was in the transition of understanding between the difference between knowledge and not being educated. I don't want to call it ignorance or something like that, because now we are in a world of liberalism where most of our words or whatever we say is scrutinized. so the Ethiopian political situation, especially when it comes to the elites, they are more of like into a book type. Like they are good in an ideological understanding. I call their struggle or challenge as an understanding reality versus book smartism. You can be very smart when it comes to understanding books or ideologies, but if you fail to understand the reality, then you should call upon yourself rather than others and say that, what am I doing? So in current Ethiopia, in this transition, we need people who really scrutinize themselves or ask themselves, what am I doing? Rather than like having all these packages of political programs or ideologies. And Nagisa was describing the whole popular uprising. I mean, it was like between 2013 till 16, if I'm correct. So 14, yeah. But during 13, it has started in some way, in some regions. So that that popular uprising was, it's not really a copy paste of the Arab Spring, but it will look like that. It looks like that, because during that time, most of the dictators in the Arab world were ousted from power using the public uprising. So that model may have served some of the political activists in my country to follow similar model. I'm not saying the same model, similar model in challenging the system. Fortunately, Ethiopia is like the most fortunate country in the history of most countries, because our transitions always had internal change than external influence. When we fight each other, we always knew that at the end of the day, we and the country are the most important thing to us. So the current Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, came through that struggle. If most of the movement was like dictated from the outside, we would have got into a lot of troubles, like most of the Arab countries that we are seeing today. But fortunately, our elites, activists, came into terms, and they have understood that if they follow this way of popular uprising, they will end up in a nightmare that they couldn't figure out. So due to this process, Prime Minister Abiy came to power from the ruling party. So this person, I believe personally, has a vision of creating democratic scene, a vision of uniting people when it comes to mentally. Like, again, Nagisa was mentioning it. We, as people of Ethiopia, we have so many nations and nationalities. We are a country of 100 million humans. So, to satisfy this population and this political ideology where most of the political aspirations are based on tribal lineage or tribal fronts, that is always difficult for a politician to fix. Because whenever you give a bread for one, if the other wants an apple, then how to create that situation of like producing more apple or producing more bread or producing more other stuff is always a question. So now the Prime Minister is in that situation. Fortunately, there is also like an opportunity in that country. I am repeating the word fortunately because we have a very strong bureaucracy in my country. That bureaucracy is led by citizens. Most of the citizens are educated internally rather than rather than going through other universities. So this bureaucratic system, if it gets the energy, a positive energy of democratization as well as rule of law and all those kinds of things, we have a better future of maintaining our country and uniting the people. The third point that Nagisa has mentioned, but I will mention it in a different way, we have elites or political actors who always have difficulties in defining the term federalism. So currently we have two extreme groups. The one extreme describes federalism or the ethnic federalism as a cake. The other group defines the ethnic federalism as a toxic. So these two groups are two extremes playing on the ground of, on the political ground of Ethiopia. So how can we make them come to terms is also another challenge for the new prime minister, which is Prime Minister Abiy, and his party as well, even for the population, for the whole citizens. So my understanding throughout this whole process, for example, if we take our federalism, we have started it how long, like 300 years now, or 400 years, or more than that?
He knows the history.
No, the American federalism.
Oh, the American history, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
probably 300 years.
Close, yes.
Okay, 300 years.
Yeah.
So our federalism, 200 years?
250.
Okay. Anyway, when it comes to numbers, I'm so generous. I just give numbers. So, yeah. So the American federalism, if we take it as an example, it had started some way, but today it has changed, through course of time. Now, if we look at the way our system is organized in Minnesota, federalism for us is like a government giving a service to citizens. Whereas in the history of Indian, which is a nation in Asia, their federalism is more of how we allocate resources to citizens, how we allocate resources, how we allocate power to citizens. So the term federalism, even the notion itself, has so many interpretations. So we as Ethiopians, we need to figure out what type of federalism do we need to follow. If the federalism that we are speaking about today doesn't bake any bread or doesn't change our life, then we have to think twice. That's the most important thing. Rather than struggling or fighting on ideological frameworks, we need to find something that can change the reality on ground. And the other group, the unionists, I call it union extremists, they always think that unity of a boundary is the ultimate goal of a nation. That is always the biggest dilemma in the sphere of these political actors. Because if we always think about a boundary, then the question comes, what constitutes a boundary? Boundary is a boundary if it considers the human that is existing on that boundary. Otherwise, it's nothing. Unity of a state, unity of a government, unity of anything cannot be achieved if it doesn't actually understand what citizens aspire for. So they miss this picture, this big picture. So in order to come to terms, they have to have a sense of responsibility in defining this word federalism as well as living its truth. Because Ethiopia nowadays is one of the poorest nations in Africa. Our national debt is increasing every day. So having that luxury of political definition or political antagonism or anything like that doesn't serve any citizen, doesn't serve anyone if it doesn't change the reality on the ground. So I also pose what is best for Ethiopia. I am here in the United States. I cannot really prescribe anything for them because the life I'm living in here has its own definitions and requirements. So if I try to prescribe anything for Ethiopia today, I may be a little bit hypocritic because they are the ones who should look for a solution according to their realities. The positive thing that came in the Horn region, this is the last point that I'm going to discuss about. The positive thing that came into the region in the Horn of Africa is like once Prime Minister Abiy, Dr. Abiy, came to power, he initiated a big peace project between Eritrea and Ethiopia, between Somalia and Eritrea, between Kenya and Somalia, between Djibouti and Eritrea. So this was his biggest success. He did this anyway on purpose. As political purpose, there is a political purpose, economic purpose, and human purpose. If we look at the history of Eritreans and Ethiopians, there are one people living in two different nations. We have the same culture. We share religions. We share so many stuff. So when he talks about the peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia, I believe his main concern was how to make these people renovate or renew their historical relationship so that we can have a peaceful region. That was his main objective. When it comes to political objective, our area, the Horn of Africa, is the honeymoon of most powerful nations in the world. They take that region as a place of honeymoon because Red Sea is in our vicinity. So if the Horn of African nations don't understand the opportunities and the importance of that region, then who is going to understand the benefits, the advantage and disadvantage, and all those kinds of things? So I call him a visionary when it comes to his initiative, like connecting all these countries in the Horn region, because the Horn region has been a part of troubles for 100 years now, if I'm correct from historical numbers. So finally, you as Minnesotans, I know Minnesotans are active when it comes to social justice, politics. We are a community who run most of the show when it comes to Minnesotan politics. So understanding this fact, if you guys can influence your representatives, your senators, so that they can support the current transition in Ethiopia, you will do a big favor for Ethiopian people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, Al? Well, thank you, Mahdi. I was sitting back there and thinking, of how I'm going to be starting my part of the discussion. First, it's a limitation of the topic itself, because it says Ethiopian transition, which does not include, really, as an Eritrean, you cannot be saying much about Ethiopia. It's because, I really don't know a lot of things about Ethiopia, but thank you for Nagasa and Mali. I learned a lot, by just sitting there and listening to you about the conflict between the unionist kind of version of Ethiopia and the federalist think tanks, But also, I think I can speak, on the implication of Ethiopia, in the Horn of Africa. And I think that's my leeway, my small window to be talking about this topic in a general sense.
Actually, you can say a lot because Eritrea have been there before 1991 and still.
Yeah, I think so, but by the way, today or yesterday was the first anniversary of the peace rapprochement, between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And I was surprised. I was looking at watching Eritrean TV, and they allowed, Dr. Abiy to drive on the streets of Asmara without an Eritrean license. Yeah, but it was great, you know, it was great, really. That's how things needs to be. You know, nations need to come together. We have a lot in common, you know, than we have our difference and everything. But folks, you know, things has not been good, has not been easy for Eritreans for the last 50 years. Really, really, I mean, even the last 27 years, we were called the pariah state, what, the North Korea of Africa? Yeah, you name it, all kinds, you know, sanctions was just removed, you know, after, from 2009, you know, to 2018 or 2019. Thanks to Abiy, he spearheaded, you know, the removal of the sanction against Eritrea, because at the time, Ethiopia was the temporary member of the Security Council in the United Nations. You know, but imagine to go with a very, you know, economic problem that you have in the country, to go like, you know, for 10 years, you know, sanction, it was not easy, you know. But we have nothing to complain about Ethiopia developing, really, to be honest with you. For us, actually, it's a honeymoon period. You know, we don't have that existential issue that we had from consequent, you know, rulers in Ethiopia that, you know, that made our life a lot hell. You know, first of all, Eritrea was a separate country under the Italian rule. You know, in 1962, Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia under the auspices of the United Nations for 10 years. Imagine at the time we had an independent and democratic parliament. And we were just packaged, you know, and we were shoved, you know, given, you know, to one of the most absolute monarch in the history of Africa. So what happened? Look at the contradiction. And now we are accused for not being democratic. But back then, because of geopolitical reasons, the United States, you know, decided, you know, to dismantle the Eritrean democracy and give it, you know, to a king. What a hypocrisy. And then after that, you know, also the USSR, during the Cold War, also took side, you know, with Mengistu, you know, and that's why I'm here. That's why Samuel is here, because we cannot even, you know, we cannot even walk on the streets, because, you know, it's like corpses everywhere. Antonov planes, you know, the same thing that they did in Afghanistan, they were doing it literally in Eritrea. You know, you cannot even walk, you know, escaping your home, you know, during the day, because, you know, you will be blanket bombed, you know, trying to flee to the Sudan. It was horrible. And at the time, you know, we were like 14, 15 years old, you know. I'm sure, you know, you guys were very young, you know, you cannot even imagine it. You know. So that has, you know, that's the Ethiopia that we know. From Haile Selassie to the Derg, and then, you know, that took like 30 years. Economy was destroyed. You know, all institutions, you know, democratic institutions were destroyed. Infrastructure was destroyed. Over 65,000 soldiers, you know, or what do you call them, fighters were killed. Over 250 people migrated from the country. Genocide, you know, in every village that you go. You know, the village that my mom and my dad came from was just literally burned to ash. You know, with 300 people, you know, just, you know, perishing. I have a cousin, you know, who was a year old at the time, you know, who is blind, you know, from the brush fire that was coming from the straw hats, you know, who's living in the Sudan. So, you know, it touched every life, you know, of every Eritrean. That's what we remember about the imperial hegemony of Ethiopia. And then, you know, the last 27 years, also the TPLF, you know, wanted to reverse, you know, the Eritrean independence, which was conducted, you know, by a referendum in 1993, you know, with the observation of the United Nations, approval of the United Nations. So it must have to be reversed, you know. So, and they declared war on Eritrea again. mind you, that declaration of war was not removed until Abiy came to power. There was actually a parliamentary declaration of war against Eritrea until the year 2018. So, you know, folks, you know, we are a product of our experiences, you know, and this is the mindset that you have in Eritrea. It's like, you know, as long as that Ethiopian hegemony exists, you know, we cannot rest. I mean, we always have to guard our sovereignty, our people, and everything. We're not going to go back there. So that's, you know, that's the Ethiopia that also not only in Eritrea, you know, also you can see Ethiopia doing it the same thing, you know, in the Ogaden region. I don't mean Ethiopians, but the Ethiopian mindset of hegemony, the imperial hegemony, you know, which was also the reason why you have that situation, coup, in the Amharic region. The same kind of mentality. You know, those fights still exist, but it's our hope in Eritrea that Ethiopia develops so quickly, you know, and democratizes so quickly, so it will be a huge impact not only, and a source of stability, not only for Eritrea, but for Sudan and all the regions, you know, in the Horn of Africa. So when you go back and think about all these things, you know, and what has changed in the last year in Eritrea, you know, the economy is starting to grow. Sanctions have been lifted. There is frequent visits, you know, of Ethiopian tourists, you know, with their lots of money to Eritrea, you know, and everything, you know, and you can see the benefits. We're already, in just 1 year, we're starting to see the impact, you know, of peace in Eritrea. And I am sure, you know, Ethiopia is much bigger. I don't think the Eritrean economy is so small, it's going to impact Ethiopia. But, you know, if we continue on this trajectory, you know, we expect, you know, good things to happen in the region. We're not going to, you know, hopefully the Horn of Africa is known, you know, for its famine, you know, turmoil, terrorism, and everything. You know, if Ethiopia really, because it's the big power in the middle, if Ethiopia, you know, becomes stable, you know, and Ethiopia, you know, becomes more democratized, you know, you're going to start thinking, you know, things kind of flourishing, you know, and expanding into the other region. Just because Ethiopia and Eritrea were the big, you know, loggers, you know, for the last 50 years, you can see the same situation in Djibouti. You see the same situation in Somalia. Somalia is divided among, you know, five lands or 5 tribes. See, and you see the same thing also, you know, it's the Somaliland, Puntland, you know, and everything. And why was this thing happening? Is because, you know, the TPLF regime, you know, invaded Ethiopia and Somalia in 2006 to stabilize Somalia, you know, which was very, very counterproductive. You know, once you start seeing other countries, you know, crossing their borders and going to other places, you know, they're not going to bring stability. You know, it's just adding fuel, you know, to an existing situation. And we need to stick also by the mandate of the African Union. You see, Eritrea and Ethiopia, yeah, you know, we are very close historically, culturally, in a lot of ways. But you know, the African Union's charter accepted, you know, those colonial boundaries the way they are. You know, and we are bound by that. And that's how we, in Eritrea, we say, hey, listen, I mean, the Ethiopian king, Menelik, signed a treaty with the Italians accepting, you know, the borders between Ethiopia and Eritrea. He actually, they call it the Treaty of Wuchale, which means that, you know, both countries, you know, both Eritrea and Ethiopia are not the same entity. But things were reversed, you know, right after World War II. And when the Italians, you know, they lost the war during the World War II. It's like, you know, United States was the bigger country, and just because they want a proxy state in the region, you know, Ethiopia was chosen as an anchor country there to do all this work, you know, for the Western powers. You know, and at the time, Roosevelt literally told the king, we're giving you the land, but the land is ours, which means Eritrea. See, so, and you can see right away from that, you know, annexing Eritrea. 1952, you see the king volunteering to, you know, to send military personnel to Korea, and then to Congo, you know, and on all these things, you know, so literally, you know, they were looking for a yes man, you know, in that part of the world, you know, to continue monitoring and dominating the area. And then the Russians, you know, who were against Eritrean annexation during the federal system, they changed the whole thing because of the Cold War, and they took the side of the Derg, and they started to do more horrendous thing against the Eritrean people. So we have been squeezed, sandwiched, you know, for so long, you know. And to be honest with you, thank you, Nagasa and Mahdi, for us, you know, it's really a breeze of fresh air, you know, to see Abiy and to see him walk on the streets of Asmara and everything. So there is a lot of more good things to come, but the peace just started, but we need to work on it. And I think, you know, it's going to require the commitment of everybody to make this thing a reality in the Horn of Africa. And I thank you.
Thank you,
All right. I think Alamin have covered most of the Eritrean history, how it existed and how it became an independent country, so I'm not going to go into that much of it, but maybe later on as we go on, I might point out a few things he might have left out. I believe it was Franklin D. Roosevelt who said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. When it comes to in the case of Ethiopia, Ethiopia was sort of built by force from the beginning. All ethnic groups were forced to be one. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem with that is favoring one ethnic group over another created a problem. Beginning from Menelik, who went southern Ethiopia and acquired part of Ethiopia. I mean, there is a history that Ethiopia had 3,000 years history, but I personally disagree with that because Ethiopia actually, the current Ethiopian shape was made after Menelik. King Menelik invaded southern Ethiopia and make the current shape of Ethiopia. A lot of, in history, whenever I read it, by the way, I was born in Ethiopia and raised in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, so I'm quite familiar with what was going on there, and I follow basically every day, I can say that. What created a problem in this region is not the fact that Ethiopia is formed, there's no problem with that, but who benefited from that is the problem. What created a problem was who benefited from that. It might not be the entire population now. The main two ethnic groups in Ethiopia are the Oromo and the Amhara. I believe there are 80 ethnic groups, over 80 ethnic groups, I think. If I'm mistaken, correct me, all Ethiopians, you can correct me. But the main ethnic groups are the Amhara and the Oromo. I believe the Oromo is about 37% and the Amhara is 27%. The rest are 6% Tigrayans and then 6% the Sidama and go on and on. The past, from Menelik, followed by Haile Selassie, it seemed to favor more to the Amhara ethnic group. It might not be the whole ethnic group might have benefited, but a certain intention was made to benefit the Amhara group. So these two administrations concentrate more on Amhara group, although it might not have benefited the whole Amhara group. And then comes Mengistu Haile Mariam. Mengistu Haile Mariam, in a way, he was okay because he wasn't considered one or the other because he wasn't Amhara or Oromo. He was, I believe, where was he from?
Recently he said he's Oromo.
Some place his own, but he didn't not much favor. So it was kind of, but he took over power from overthrowing the Haile Selassie government. Most of his administrations were, of course, under Amhara rule, and then of course there was also Oromo and other ethnic groups other ethnic groups too. But then when the TPLF come to power, that's Tigray People Liberation Front, with the dominant power, it made it obvious that it was an ethnic-based group, favoring the Tigrayan only. If they have other ethnic groups, they were bought by either corruption or power or any other that goes with it. So although they claim to be democratic government, but the economy was controlled by them, the security was controlled by them, the military was controlled by them. So they basically formed a federal system that could benefit them in the end to secede from Ethiopia. I think Article 39 in their constitution says any region can secede if they choose to. So their main aim was to secede from Ethiopia and create their own country. But the reason, what they did was, those other ethnic groups that represented Ethiopia, they made them fight over each other in order for them to live peacefully, which is a crazy idea, but that's what that's what they did. Especially between Oromo and Amhara, they created so much conflict between them by doing some crazy stuff. They might burn something, village it and blame, okay, they might do something to Amhara group and then the Amhara region, and then they blame it on Oromo, or in the Oromo region and blame it on Amhara. So they made sure that these people cannot unite. So in order for them to live in peace, once it's a state, they didn't care what's going to happen to Ethiopia, which is really a crazy idea, but that's what the idea, the thing is. This created a lot of fear. That's why I come up to the point of saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Because now, with Dr. Abiy administration, who came to power within the EPRDF, because of the uprising of the population, mainly Kero, Fano, and other groups that were demonstrating against the government, and the Tigray Population Front, of course, retreated. The leaders retreated to Tigray, and they live in a hotel. But now, who takes over is the problem. The Prime Minister is Dr. Abiy, but he's from Oromo, and anything he does would be looked up on suspicion because of what TPLF did. That the mistrust he created among all this ethnic group created that anything you do would be looked up on suspicion. So since the people of Ethiopia were literally oppressed for 27 years, any minor thing will trigger them into thinking, aha, this is what they want to do. This is who they want to do. This is what they want to do. So it created a lot of suspicion among ethnic groups whenever something happens. I think Nagaso mentioned about who owns or who belongs, was it Yumari? Who belongs to Addis Ababa, who belongs to Addis Ababa. There was a problem with that, main problem, and of course there was an activist, I forgot his name, the journalist that was with his, no, not Jawar. Iskandar Naga, yeah. Iskandar Naga, there was a journalist that was in prison. He created a movement called Bala Adara, which means the promise, I guess. The caretaker of, the caretaker of Addis Ababa, which technically belongs, most of it to, I may be wrong, but to Oromo population. And that created a main problem because Addis Ababa is the capital city, and who controls Addis Ababa might be able to control the government. So anyway, what leads to this what aggravated to this problem is the situation in economic situation in Ethiopia. Because the economic situation in Ethiopia is in a very dire. Always, Ethiopia has lived always with the donation of other countries, mainly from Western nations. Right now, Ethiopia is in debt for about $53 billion. Ethiopia owes to China itself is $13 billion. So an economic problem with a suspicion of ethnic cities will aggravate even more problems. So this is what's going on now. What, in my opinion, to do is that I don't think there will be any ethnic group in Ethiopia who could control everything anymore. Because that did not work, and also because of the fear and the suspicion, if one ethnic group tried to control Ethiopia, there will be a civil war. So it is to their advantage for all of them to work together. And I do believe all ethnic groups agree that they should have one Ethiopia. I don't think any of them want to secede. You know, OLF used to have that, but lately nobody, you don't hear that, you know. So they have to live together. And Ethiopia is a very, very, very rich country, despite the negative notation that was put upon the country. It's a very fertile land. It's got a lot of resources. It used to be called the water fountain of Africa. So it's a very rich country and enough for everybody. Enough for everybody. But what hurt was the corruption and dependence on the Western power and being always serving other people's interests, other countries' interests. So that's what created this problem. And usually when leaders come to Ethiopia, whether Mengistu, who sided with Soviet Union communism because he needed some help. No independent thinking was there. The EPRDF, when they come to power, they relied, Al-Amin mentioned, they relied mostly on the West, and they were doing things for the West interests, going to Somalia, fighting here, fighting there, providing all kinds of help to the interests of the Western nations because they helped them, so there's nothing they can do. Well, they could do, but that's how they see it. So mainly what it comes to right now, at the end of my presentation, what I want to say, what to do now. What should we do now? I believe Dr. Abiy's intention is very good, but the fact that he's from Oromo has been suspicious look about from the Amharic group. But in my opinion, they should sit back and give him chance to work himself. And instead of, as it is, Ethiopia is in a crossroads. It's in a very dangerous situation. And holding him with these minor problems that will lead to a disaster over demonstration here, the Hamara is oppressed, oh, Oromo did this, Oromo did that. At this time, he doesn't need that because he has to recover the country from falling apart. Because once ethnic hatred develops, it could lead to a genocide. And it will be to benefit of nobody. Everybody would get hurt. All the ethnic people get hurt. But one thing is for sure, in my opinion, one ethnic group cannot rule Ethiopia anymore. That's a fact. Because it has proven again and again it failed. And what the EPRDF did was the ultimate price that the Ethiopian people paid because of ethnic-based government. So it will not happen again. That's my opinion. So what Ethiopians should do is just lay back, see what he does, and then once he stabilizes the country, then, if there is any questions, solve it democratic way, and not in a sense that democracy is always a questionable phrase to me because usually most Africans, I'm just a little bit diverting from my topic, but in most of Africa, democracy is seen as paste and copy and paste from the other Western nations or any other countries, which really doesn't work because it's like the way I look at it is like there's two cars, for example. There's Honda, there's Toyota. Both have engine, transmission, all those components that make the car go. But if you put Toyota engine into Honda, it will not work. So what Africans are doing is they're trying to put Toyota's engine into Honda. It's not going to work because the components will not make it work. So transition to democracy is a process that will take a long time, and most African countries should rely on more their inter-democracy than export democracy. Because Africa is ethnic, economy is different. There's so much components that will not make work democracy the way you think it will work in the world and copied in there. So I think one thing I hear a little bit about the Gadda system, for example. The Oromo have what they call the Gadda system, which is ingrown, or what do you call it, the best? Indigenous form of administration, which is, I didn't read it deeply, but it's very well written to unite people or democratic approach. So Africans should have indigenous democracy, not just copy from other countries, whichever, I don't care where it is, west, east, or anywhere. It's not going to work because, like I said again, you can't put Honda engine into Toyota and expect it to work. It will not work because of the components that goes with it. So, in my opinion, all Ethiopians need to be patient. I believe Dr. Abiy is trying to do the best he can and give him time instead of being suspicious. Like, again, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and Ethiopians are in fear that some guy is going to, like, he's Oromo, so he's going to give all the benefit to Oromo. And that's not going to work because, again, one ethnic group rule in Ethiopia, in my opinion, has ended. There is no way that one ethnic group could rule Ethiopia. So just give him time, let him do his work, and then let's see what happens after that. Then if you have any question or a pressure or anything, then he can resolve it. So I am pretty sure that it might take time, but Ethiopia will be one again and then prosperous country. I do believe it will happen. And on Eritrean side, we want Ethiopia to be one country and stable because we believe a peaceful Ethiopia is peaceful Eritrea for us. The thing is, like I said, Ethiopia it's so sad to have repeated hunger in Ethiopia. Really, especially southern Ethiopia is the most fertile you can think of. And it's a shame that one of the, in the Horn of Africa, the richest, the most fertile country is Ethiopia. And then, again, because of power struggle and all those dependency mentality made Ethiopia look, it couldn't tap its own resources. So a peaceful Ethiopia will be a peace for us, for Eritreans, and all these previous governments, like what the Haji mentioned, Alamin, he mentioned it earlier, Haile Selassie literally, actually it was Franklin D. Roosevelt, unfortunately, who handed over Eritrea to Ethiopia, although I mentioned his name earlier. Because of geopolitics at that time, the Cold War was in height of Cold War. The world, well, not height of, but the Second World War just ended, and there was a fear about Soviet Union and East and Western travel. So it was geopolitics, kind of understandable. I guess every country had to look for its own interests. So handed over Eritrea, and then of course the struggle began in 1961. Haile Selassie took it. I don't want to repeat the whole thing again, but in a sense, Eritrea was an independent country, and it was colonized for 60 years under Italy, and Menelik signed the treaty 1900, 1901, and 1909, even the borders that we was fighting. I don't want to go to that one. But the thing is, these two countries are sisterly countries, brotherly countries. They could live in peace if they can only avoid outside influence and look inward themselves. So Horn of Africa have a really good chance becoming self-sustained and developed country, and then peaceful country too. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I'll just add a few points, since most of it has been discussed. I'll just add a few points on, you know, we were born in the time of transition in 1991, so I'm glad to get the lived experience of what it looks like, because we only read Kego Kobzamacha and we read Oromo. Other than that, we don't know the lived experience. So it's really an honor to share that. And so the first thing I want to emphasize on is, maybe Peter, you can speak to it more, the way we understand history. It's unilinear. So it's like, it's a sequence of things, and then everybody interprets it their own way. Ethiopia has 3,000 years of history. No, it's 100 years. No, it's... So it's really sad that history has been politicized so much. So at this time, that's also one source of problem, I guess. It's unilinear. So that's one thing we should really think about. The other is binary. We always say unionist versus ethno-nationalist. What about the silent majority? What about me, especially? I'm a citizen who wants to, you know, find a balance between the two. I believe there is historical injustice in Ethiopia, but it's not, we should discuss about that and also think about how can we move forward as a nation as well. So always there is this politics of using binary. There are two types of this, there are three types of this. But I think there is a majority, a silent majority that should be considered. That's what I really want, especially when it comes to the young population, to be critical of this kind of, because we paid a price. 1960s, there was the best chance for Ethiopia. Brilliant students from the US and Europe came to Ethiopia to be part of the transition, part of the political change, because we have been led by a monarch since until 1974. But due to this binary, they ended up killing each other. There was no compromise. That's the danger of having always binary. They couldn't compromise. There was IHAPA, there was Maison, HAT, was League, all these parties. So the final result was bad. I think it's also a consequence of that today we don't have pragmatic leaders when it comes to, my brother was sharing how there is no human touch, when it's just ideology floating around. So we lost thousands and thousands of brilliant minds because of this binary and because of this ism of ideologies. So that's one thing we should be careful. And when it comes to the past, there is of course cultural dominance. But today, when I reflect as a young, when I see what's going on in Ethiopia, all of us are poor. Majority of Ethiopians. One thing that gives me hope is everybody is almost on the same level when it comes to, I mean, poverty is like, it's everywhere. So the conversation I had with my Eritrean friend, I remember he was exiled from Eritrea. I met him at med school when I was in Ethiopia. We are both young people who, we don't know what was going on in the past, but we asked ourselves, what do you benefit because now Eritrea is independent? He's now, as a refugee, he's in Ethiopia. And also, Ethiopians, like students there, they are not enjoying, I mean, that's how we came to the US after we applied self-scholarship. We both didn't benefit that much. The thing is, we should realize the reality on the ground. That's what we're discussing as young people. What did it bring to me? How does my future look like? What's the result? So I remember having those conversations with my Eritrean friends and other friends when I was in Ethiopia in school. So that's one thing I want especially, because I focus on the young generation because 70% of Ethiopian population is under 30. Yeah. 65% of our population is under 24, which is a danger and at the same time a blessing. So there is a young population that needs to be critical. I hope the young generation won't be a victim of these political entrepreneurs who just want to give us these paradigms, who wants to realize our dreams for us. They dream for us, they execute for us. So I hope the young generation will question that, will question the status quo, will question, okay, this all result. Millions, I mean thousands of people died for the Ethiopia-Eritrean war, which is really sad. But both countries are poor now. And now, after 24 years, now we are together, back. What about those wars? What about those thousands of people who died? It's done. It was a political game. So I hope the young generation will start to question the status quo and challenge whatever is being provided or catered by the politicians. The other thing when it comes to Ethiopian transition is transitions has been hard in Ethiopia. 1991, there was a constitution, right? When I read history, what I realized is that constitution didn't give a chance to be discussed by everyone, frankly. People say the past 27 years was, undemocratic, it was bad, TPLF dominance. But because of their interest, when it comes to the constitution part, only that part was democratic. Because they have their, that's the problem we have now. We try to just pinpoint what we want. That's the selfish part of being a politician, actually. Because I see the overall process was bad in 1991. The country didn't have a clear roadmap. Because there are so many dreams that are, as my brother mentioned earlier, ethno-nationalist. I still believe it's an identity politics. Both have deep down, they have the same philosophy, be it ethno-nationalist or nationalist. But the thing is, while I understand the past, it's intricate what kind of issues we have. There should have been more discussion. There should have been more, engagement among different parts of Ethiopia. But the constitution process was fast, and it's done. So now we are paying a price. And there are groups which claim the constitution cannot be amended because of their own interest. Again, as I say, some constitutions, I think the US constitution has been amended 27 times, if I'm not mistaken. So the thing is, there are these political operatives, the loud ones, I can say, but there are also some, there is a majority in between who wants to be more critical. And I believe that's also one thing, I hope, the one in the middle. We should recognize the past injustice, and then we should also recognize the citizenship. For example, me, I can never be a mayor of my city now, in Eritrea, because the political system now, it doesn't allow me to be a mayor. That's painful. I should identify myself as Oromo, or Amharic, or Somali, or that's how the system is now. EPRDF is a coalition of, EPRDF is not a party, it's a front. It's a coalition of 4 major parties. OHDED, the new so-called ODEPA, Arepa, the new ANDM, the Amhara representatives, and the South, and the TPLF. And the others, the Somali and the others are their sister parties. So the current political system don't recognize me as a citizen. So the thing is, these big political paradigms don't see the majority of us who are in between. That's a problem we have. And we are still discussing about the same question from the 1960s. Ethnic issue and land to the tiller. Still land is owned by the government in Ethiopia. So we are still in the same question while the economy is in a mess. Ethiopia spent $29.3 billion state fund and 793 billion birr. That's why we are so-called developing. It's fully funded by the state. Our financial infrastructure is bad. There is no discussion about that. There is no job creation. So now ethnic entrepreneurs or nationalists are using this population to just, that's the result. That's the result of, there is more young people who don't have any work or any future. So they just took the street trying to find something. And that, at some point, the state realized it cannot continue like this. So I also hope we can have the economic component. The sad thing about Ethiopian politics is we perceive it as if it's only identity. The economy has a huge impact now. So, for example, last year, I think this May, so far 93,000 students graduated from almost 40 universities in the country. There is no job for them. That's the sad reality. But the sad thing now, still our politicians are discussing about these ethnic questions, which is acceptable. But we should really discuss about this, the economy issue. That's the sad part. And as I say, we are only focusing on the binaries. So I hope we'll start to question more where is the silent majority. How can we compromise? One thing we like in our politics is compromise. We need to compromise. And I really feel sad when it comes to Abiy Ahmed, how he's struggling to satisfy the ethno-nationalists and also the nationalists. Still, I say deep inside, the philosophy is the same, it's identity. So also, there's a saying, I think Albert Einstein said, you can't solve the problem by the same mindset who created it. EPRDF is still in power, guys. EPRDF, the party who executed this for 27 years, is in power. So do we call it reformation? Do we call it revolution? What do we call it? It's complicated. It's not even textbook type of change. All the cadres, all the leaders who are in power now were part, the past 10 years, 27 years. They were part of EPRDF. Can we solve this by that? Or can we have a genuine discussion as a nation? How can we move forward? What is the clear roadmap? We don't have a clear roadmap now. That's also the issue. Every now and then, after Abiy came to power, there were many ethnic conflicts, frankly speaking. 3.5 million people were displaced. #1 internally displacement in the world. It's a fact now. So this shows me you cannot just discuss about the small stuff or changes coming. If we want it to be a fundamental change, we need to have a political roadmap. We need to have this major discussion. How can we move forward as a nation? How can we empower all people? Or how can we find a compromise between the two? Because even EPRDF is in a power struggle now. The assassination that went was not an incident. It was going for a long time. Also in the EPRDF now, there is so much going on. The TPLF in the north, they are almost becoming kind of a semi-autonomous branch in the country. They should be included, whether we like it or not. It's now, even in Ethiopia, there is no justice currently. It's a political justice. Some people are in prison, some are not. We know they were part of corruption, major part of corruption. They were part of that, but they are in power now. Because there is political justice, not real justice going on. So these are the frank questions we need to entertain. While I'm so optimistic because of the change, there are now more experts joining election board, joining different parts of the government bureaucracy, which makes me very optimistic. But at the same time, the big elephant in the room, I don't believe EPRDF can solve the issue we have now. Because that's the organization who has been leading the nation for the past 27 years. So people, I don't need to fully support the transition or fully oppose. I can be critical. That's the problem we have now. Even what's going on now, there are so many oppositions starting now in DC, Washington, DC, here. People just want you to be in one side. I just hope the young generation will be critical, not like, oh, I support this, so this is the absolute right, or I oppose this. I hope we can be more critical. That's what I'm hoping when it comes to Ethiopian transition. So what's the next step? As I was here and I continuously discuss with my young colleagues there is no job. People are hopeless. When someone is hopeless, they can do anything. They want to find purpose. While I appreciate the Fano, Kero, Ejeto, the new young people who are now leading, I can say, most of the movement, these young people also don't have jobs. They don't have dream. They are not engaged daily to critically think or work. So I also think about their future. But the politicians are using them as a bargaining chip. That's what most people just say, we can do this on Addis because I have this. They are being used as a political, bargaining chip rather than really lay out the economic policy. If we really think for those young kids, that's why we need to discuss about the economy. That's why we need to discuss about how can we ensure these young people will have a future. So I really hope one discussion through time we'll have is nobody should be obliged to support or to oppose. I just want them to be critical. As I said repeatedly, critical. Because that's the issue we have now. When you just assume your position is absolutely right, there is no compromise from the outset. So I hope now we can be frank about the transition process in Ethiopia, and EPRDF should address the power struggle among themselves now, we see constant shifts. Even after Abiy came, so many shifts in the regional government, so many appointments within 2 years. We see the struggle, it's clear. And I'm afraid, I don't see any options compared to EPRDF. That's the stark truth. But they start to engage and realize EPRDF has created this for a while. So now they should include more, be inclusive in the power transition process. Then I can call it transition. But I really struggle, according to any textbook definition or anything, to call this a transition, while the party is still there. So I hope there will be more discussion and a clear roadmap where to go. So that's what I hope will give us more chance. And thank you.
Thank you, Cal. Thank you very much. Tara, did you want to add anything?
No, maybe.
So, yes, please, and introduce yourself.
Front seater always speak first. That's why I'm raising my hand.
Yes.
So my name is Abdurazak Dube. It's a little bit hard to call it, so just try it, Abdurazak. So I'm listening the whole side. Like the presentations were amazing. I would like to appreciate the presenters, and I would like to especially appreciate Nagesa for keep reminding me about the meeting. So, because I enjoy the conversation over here, it's amazing, and I would like to appreciate you guys' effort as Eastside Library for making this like amazing platform to discuss about very important issues. Being said that, I'm gonna say a few pointers. I believe every panelist or people that discuss the issues before me said a little bit about it, but I want to say something, especially this concerning the constitution that my friend is talking about, the amendment issue. So I have some sort of legal background, so the first question we should ask is that how EPRDF or TPLF come to this ethnic federalism. By the way, when you put this ethnic federalism into Google and search it, you only find Ethiopia is the only country that related to this thing, and it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. There are maybe like some few countries that have a little bit a system that near to kind of federalism that Ethiopia is following right now, but there is no exactly the same country that follow that kind of platform. So the source of that constitution, what forced EPRDF or TPLF to do that kind of thing is it's a continuation of historical process that the country go through, especially when they say like the 1960s generation was raising this question of identity, and that question of identity, there were like a kind of like discrimination based on who you are in that country for a long period of time, which is still like a kind of like under debate. The different ethnic group in the country, they don't agree on who were oppressing who. They all have their kind of like, they all have a different version of a story when they tell you about who oppressed who. So it depends on like if you hear who oppressed who, like the kind of conclusion you get. For instance, if you listen from somebody from Oromo, the kind of like oppression you hear from Oromo, you can't listen the same kind of story from Amharic side. So the first thing, in order to solve the current situation in that country, the first thing, the political elite and the historians should sit together in the table and discuss and settle that issue. Unless that issue solved, unless that issue like get some sort of solution, it's pretty hard to avoid a kind of like suspicion that everyone's have, I think Mahdi was saying something concerning like whenever Dr. Abiy do something, the belief the other side or other people that are not from the same ethnic group with Abiy suspect something else, even if let me say he is just planning some sort of project to be done in Bahardar. Bahardar is the capital city of Amhara region. Rather than thinking positive about the impact of that project on the people around there, the politicians and the historians start creating conspiracies saying that he is doing this in order to evict farmers or whatever. They will create some sort of story and tell to the people, and people were people are already ready to accept whatever kind of narration come to them because of the long existing mistrust between the people that was created by politicians, at the same time by the rulers, especially by the rulers, created by the rulers. So in order to make a unite Ethiopia that satisfy everyone, the first thing the current I call them, actually he said he resists to call them a transitional government. I call the existing ruling elites. I can't call really EPRDF is in the power right now because the EPRDF was naming the country was under the rule of TPLF for the last 27 years. The rest of them were like spectators that were clapping hand for whatever TPLF were doing in the country. So I can't call it EPRDF. Right now, the elites that come from especially Amharas and Oromos that are in the power, that is called the reformists right now, they have to bring historians and bring different community members, especially from two ethnic groups, and discuss openly about what has been taking place, and they have to kind of try to build trust between the two major ethnic groups. That's how actually they defeat TPLF. That's how they defeat TPLF. At the end, when around 2017, I think, around 2017, at the end of 2017, when the conflict reached its climax, the two parties, especially the party that represent Amhara and the party that represent Oromo, what do we call them? We call them ADP, ODP. They kind of try to create some sort of alliance in order to at least remove TPLF from playing a major role in Ethiopian politics. So I think one of the most important thing is just to bring the elites and the societies from both ethnic groups and let them discuss openly on how to just continue Ethiopia to be continue as a country. The two ethnic groups must collaborate and coexist. Unless I put the existence of Ethiopia under question mark, unless the two major ethnic groups agree. I know I'm not ignoring the rest of ethnic groups in the country. But historically, these two ethnic groups have been through a lot of stuff. So if the problem between these two groups solved, probably through passage of time, Ethiopia will be, I think, one of the peaceful country maybe in the whole. That being Ethiopia peaceful country in that region will benefit the whole entire of countries surrounding that area. The Ethiopian, the peaceful protests that have been taking place in Ethiopia even encourage Sudanese to remove the dictator Omar al-Bashir from Sudanese presidential position. Mm-hmm. So something that happened in Ethiopia positively or negatively affects the whole entire of East African region. So they need to do on this. I think that's what I just want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's Abdurazek?
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
thank you, thank you. And as a historian, I appreciate that you think historians have some particular contribution. And believe me, if we had a room full of historians, we would all disagree with each other also. So, and speaking of historians, would you like to say anything, Johnson?
Just give me as a listener.
I know, but would you like to say anything? And tell them who you are.
Joseph Williams, I'm a professor over at the U. Trained political science. So very much interested in the subject matter. So focus on that region. In many respects, I think, not to sort of go into this like long lecture, but the Horn as an exercise in human existence is an extremely fascinating laboratory, so to speak. Concepts of identity, of political power, of all of these things that we sort of take for granted, they sort of are laid bare in that region in a very complicated way. That's why it's very, I think, not just for people living there, but especially for outsiders when you first sort of hear about what's going on, where maybe you go in with sort of, let's say if you go in with the sort of naive conception of people who are similar to each other get along. So then you look at Somalia, you say to yourself from the outset, that must be the prime place to get along. Language, religion, many ways respects culture. And then you have a state that falters in the 1990s. Wait, what? What's going on? Right. You talk about Eritrea and Ethiopia. You say to yourself, right now you heard a lot about the TPLF that was dominating Ethiopia, and then Eritrea, where, in fact, if you travel, if you live in the southern parts of Eritrea, Asmara downwards, you can travel for hours and encounter the same language, religion, culture, even all the way down to Addis Ababa. It's going to look still very familiar, even if it's a different language, Amharic. You travel northwards for like 20 minutes, and you'll encounter a different language, perhaps even different religion, and so on and so forth. So again, if you take that conception of similar people should want to be together, Eritrea right there, especially the leaders in this case, the Tigray Liberation Front, the Tigray speak Tigrinya. The current president in Eritrea, he speaks Tigrinya. So again, if you go in with that naive conception, you're befuddled. Makes no sense to you. You have the same quote-unquote ethnic group, and here you are fighting a war. What's going on? So all of that is really, I think, the only thing I would add to this, and it sort of speaks to what you're saying. And that is, whenever you hear, I think our use of the word ethnic group is a little naive, or a little simplistic. We assume people exist in groups, especially one-dimensional groups. You are of this ethnic group. In fact, as you were mentioning, the idea of you being in a ethnic group is a result of someone with a political program making things dichotomous for you. Here we are sitting together, and if we were to ask everyone's background, you see we're from all over the place. Someone like Donald Trump comes in here, and his objective is to now make it clear to draw the fault lines and have you choose. Are you this or are you that? He creates a dichotomy for you. Right? He goes from something that's multidimensional to making it dichotomous. And now you have to exist in that world. Right? In many respects, as you're saying, these sort of political entrepreneurs, that's precisely what they do. Very much like what you see Donald Trump doing right now with Ilhan Omar. Right? He talks about, anti-Semitic. Meanwhile, he's okay with white nationalists. And he uses that as a shield of saying she's anti-Semitic, and right? What is he doing? He's creating these dichotomies because he's trying to create these dichotomies because that's what's going to allow him to get what he wants. And so in this respect, I think the question of what is an ethnic group is a very complicated one. Especially the ethnic map in Ethiopia was actually produced by the previous regime, by the Dirk. And the way they did it is they had a bunch of people walk around the country and sort of estimate, you have to say Islamic, okay. You have to say, okay. If you were to start asking them, based on what? Linguistics? Religion? I mean, you talk about Oromo, if we talk the region in which that linguistic group exists, that is huge, huge. And here you are saying essentially, it's the equivalent of saying if you live, let's say, all the way, let's say I'm just sort of giving you a broad sense of it. But if you talk about Oromo, you would be speaking about perhaps all the way from Minnesota to Wisconsin. Right? Now imagine just for a moment, if you live on the edge of Wisconsin, Illinois, and you happen to speak Oromo, and now you are told that you are more similar to someone else who speaks Oromo, who lives all the way in northern Minnesota, and you're supposed to be more similar to that person than you are to that person who lives right across the border in Illinois. What? Right? But here we are using these concepts, these categories, and employing that that's what you're supposed to be. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention, I guess, to complicate things even further. When we're talking about politics, ultimately we are talking about power. Yeah. I mean, in the sense that I don't need to be similar to you to walk across the Minnesota to Wisconsin border. Are people fundamentally different from each other? No. You can go from Germany to Austria to Switzerland, you can have the same language, same culture, same everything, but guess what? There's somebody else in power. So we're ultimately talking about political power, and we're connecting it to cultural similarity. But that's something that we're actively doing. Yeah. That's not something to be taken for granted. And the question you always have to ask is, who's making that connection, and why are they making that connection? Just like Donald Trump. That's it.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. So I want to emphasize what Negesa said at the beginning, that this is the first conversation. Clearly, we have to make things even more complicated before we can begin to figure out how to move forward. So there's time for a few questions, but I want to emphasize that this is the first conversation, and I so appreciate all of you who have spoken already, and I appreciate that. I feel like everyone has made an effort to educate the rest of us who probably don't know very much or don't know enough, and not just to emphasize your own point of view, to just drive your point home. And I really appreciate that you've made the effort to try educate us, even if we're going to go home more confused than we came in. That's okay. That I think that, and I didn't know you were a student of Y. Spano, and it's very useful to know that, Mahdi, and he would be very proud of you tonight. So we have time. We could take a couple of questions. I know, Olivia, you were eager to ask a question right away.
Oh, practically right away.
Yes.
I was interested in the Aramaic, Oromo clashing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the difficulties. But this morning I read that in Awassa there was another uprising, and I was trying to put it together because so far apart, the northern part of the northeast? West. Thank you. Aramaic and Amharic. And way down in Awassa, what was that?
Sidam.
It was not in Awassa? Or
It's
the northern
Awassa.
one?
The ethnic group in Awassa is Sidam. Around. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about, do you know, I mean, what went on? Or Cal?
Yes.
Or Negesa either?
Yes. Did you finish your question?
I wanted to know what the relationship was, because the media made it look to me like they were the same, and I'm thinking, oh, the whole country is falling.
Okay. Yeah. The people in the north, northeast, north and northeast, I can say it Amhara. That's at least culturally, the the Amhara culture is dominant in Ethiopia. The culture is the language, at least, if not the people. I can't say the whole ethnic group was dominant, but since the formation of modern Ethiopia in between 80 to 1900, modern Ethiopia. So the emperor, the first emperor, Menelik, and is Amhara, and then the Haile Selassie, maybe not Amhara by blood, some say Oromo, but the culture, and including the religion, the dominant culture, language, whatever, is the Amhara culture. And every Ethiopian town, if you go, people speak Amharic, while predominantly the Oromo or South or from any other clan. It was a government policy. The policy was to unite the people of Ethiopia, like we have 80 ethnic groups. So the policy was there has to be one language that unites the people, and the better culture that should be adopted. So that was the Amhara, whatever culture. So, and what happened there in Amhara was, I can't, there is dispute as to what it is. The government side said it was an attempt to coup d'etat. So, but there was a killing of the regional state president and officials. The killing was led by a general who have been imprisoned and was sentenced a life sentence before, but was pardoned by the new prime minister when all political prisoners were released. He led that operation, so he killed, I think, yeah, those people were killed, and there was that thing going on. In addition to that, there was also conflict, ethnic, like there was a conflict between the Amhara and the Benishangul groups, and somehow the Oromos in Amhara region. There were other conflicts in the north also. But now I think, at least it's kind of stable. But south, the Sidama in Awasa, to say a little bit about the southern nation and nationalities, it's one region. Ethiopia has 9 regional states. So the southern nation and nationalities region, we have about 46 ethnic groups in one region. If you take Oromia region, it's one ethnic group with one language. Amhara is the same, like one language, one Amharic speaking. Oh, it's not, actually in the Amhara region there are other also Oromo speaking, Agau and others, but predominantly it's Amhara. But in the southern nation and nationalities, we have 46 ethnic groups together as one region, in one region. So Sidama being the largest, Sidama population in 2007 census was 2.8 million, but now about 4 million maybe. So the Sidama is the largest, and Hawassa is the Sidama town. So the Sidama have been demanding a regional state status for a long time. Even in 2005, I remember they really raised that question, and the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi somehow managed and suppressed that question. They suppressed the question by bringing a Sidama, a person from that ethnic group, to be the president of the southern region, nation, and nationality. We give you this status, you just keep silent. So it has been there. So when this new prime minister come to power, Sidama again raised that question, that demand. So they have been saying, the Sidama have been pushing, and the government was trying to not responding very well. And recently, the government also trying to respond. Procedurally, according the constitution, it should first they have to submit their proposal to the regional. First, they have to decide as a zone. The Sidama council should decide. They did. They sent it to the regional government parliament. So the regional government parliament usually do not approve that. But recently, due to the pressure, they approved. And they announced that. And then electoral board should conduct people's vote, referendum. People should vote. I mean, the Sidama people, I think, should vote to either be a region or whatever. So the electoral board also announced that it will conduct that voting or referendum. However, we don't know what happened in the meantime. There is uprising. Maybe that takes, I think, 5 months or more. That is due to take some months. But in the meantime, violence occurred, and there is. You want to have a say? Yeah, I see two people to help me. I think.
Good.
Yeah, they can.
Yes, Cal, please, and then Makti. Go ahead.
So
Cal or
Yeah.
okay. I saw his hand.
Yes.
Just make a quick point. Just wanted,
Yes.
Not in terms of factually, but I just wanted to highlight this is the kind of point that I was mentioning. What you're seeing is, again, it's an incredibly complex phenomenon that's happening right now. Right? You have, in this case, Dr. Dama, right? You ask yourself, there are some folks who are to benefit from that being a regional state. If it's autonomy, then whoever are the political elites in that region will have more power, resources will flow directly to it, and it's no different than why you have certain suburbs wanting to be their own county. It comes with certain privileges. Right? Now, you are now in this specific moment where on the national level, this party, this coalition party, as unified as it once was, now currently has some internal fractions. Now, think to yourself, if you are in the quote-unquote American suburb and you're seeing this fracture, you may see this moment as an opportunity to again try to make a run for, and this is just, I'm just proposing as a hypothetical. It's possible. In other words, what you're seeing on the local level may not have anything to do with the national level, but instead, folks on the local level are appropriating what's going on. And in so doing, try to get what it is that they want. That's what makes this situation so fluid, so complicated, and not easily understood. This is just from the outset, just kind of speak about it.
Two points. One, EPRDF used to have this thing called democratic centralism.
Yeah.
So whenever they go to parliament, whenever they go to somewhere, it's from a top-down approach. The prime minister sets the policy, the prime minister writes some program, and it should be implemented. I remember as a student, when the prime minister said a single word, you hear that the next day at the administration levels. So that's what we call democratic centralism. So they say after they came to power, they actually claimed they are more liberal. But the kind of policy we have is pretty much communist when it comes to the economy. When it comes to the party structure, it's pretty much communist, democratic centralism, and the so-called revolutionary democracy. It's bizarre. So now, with the new system, with the new so-called transformation, EPRDF is not coherent. There is no centralism anymore. Before, it used to be easy to just say something and it will be executed. That's one thing, EPRDF is not coherent. The second thing is, I think my wife can speak to it more, we have 9 regions. They say it's based on ethnicity. But when it comes to the south part, it's complicated. We have so many ethnicity. When it comes to Harare, where I grew up, there are only very few minority, but who owns a so-called state? But when it comes to Sidama, they are large. At some point during the charter, actually, they were given a state, including Addis Ababa was called also state number 14 or something. Then they changed their mind when the constitution came out. But during the charter, they were considered state. So I think you can speak to it more. There are like 4 criteria, I think. No.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the 4 criteria that's stated in the Constitution for the ethnic federalism includes, if I'm not mistaken, you might correct me, like the first one is language. They should share the same language, the same culture, the same ethnic identity, and they should, what was the last one? Geographic position, that was the 4 ones. But when it comes to the southern nationalities, they don't follow these 4 principles.
Mati?
Yeah, anyway, I'm not going to comment on this one because they have said already more about it, but it is fascinating that the professor was saying that politics is more about power. So that's the reality. But in my case, when you don't have to be a political scientist or a politician or whatever, because in Ethiopia we had people who ruled the country who have never been in college or something, because they just maintained the union, keeping different types of interests while they are also assuming their interest. But what I want to mention, now is, for example, my friend, I am also from Eritrea. We are from the same region. I was born in there. So, but there is something that we need to understand when it comes to reality. Of course, there is what we call beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. Okay? EPRDF used to follow democratic centralization, right? But today you don't see that consistency. I am not defining the situation from political definition, but we as a citizen, we are observing that there is a change. Even though it is inconsistent, there is a change. We have to appreciate that. The other thing that I have learned from the whole American system is, in America, you have multiple opinions, so many stuff. But in order to change, in order to bring the change that you want, first you have to organize, advocate, do a lot of stuff. I am not saying that there is justice all over America. There is racial injustice, economic injustice, so many injustices, okay? But when it comes to a country like Ethiopia, if you never had the culture of democracy, democracy cannot be built today. Again and again I can say, we are lucky that the change came from the EPRDF itself. Because, why? In Ethiopia, they were trying to build one strong front, making that front a lifetime party. Okay? That was our mistake as a society. As a society, not only as a politicians, as a society, that was our mistake. But how can we change that? Through popular uprising, today we are observing or we are seeing another day. Though again, it's inconsistent, it's weak, or whatever you call it, there is a change. We stand on today, we will look for tomorrow, then we will look the day for after the other day. So we want to build a democratic system. We started it today, we will continue and we will continue. But this process cannot satisfy you or me, because we are the youth of that nation. We want the change overnight. We want the change overnight. Let me tell you, those kids who went on the street to ask for the right, employment, and all those kinds of things, all their causes was true. All their causes were logical. But if you have a poor country that doesn't provide all your dreams, what are you going to do? Work on your dreams, be patient, look towards the future. That's the solution.
Thank you, Mahdi. And
Yeah.
I would
Maybe
also
we-
add something.
We should sort of end on that note. You're going to,
Yeah.
all right? And,
Yeah.
And as an American, I want to say I wish my neighbors who are not immigrants, my neighbors who have grown up here, I wish that we had these kinds of conversations. Because we could be having the same conversation about the Democratic Party and who's really in charge. What can we learn from our Ethiopian and Eritrean friends to figure out how we can make the Democratic Party more responsive to the needs of people in the United States? These are not peculiar issues. I mean, all of us have individual specific lives, but the mess that the United States is in is not different from the mess that Ethiopia is in, or anywhere else in the world, it does, to yield to the political scientist in the room, it's a question of power, and how the people who don't have power to create a system that meets their needs, what we do. So I really appreciate everyone tonight, and lest you overstay, maybe your families are waiting for you. I hope that Negesa and I, and actually let me say all of you, if you're interested in helping us organize more conversations, if you think that it's useful perhaps to get a focused question for each conversation and do a series of conversations, we will stay in touch. I have your email. We will stay in touch through email. And let me please urge you to come 2 weeks from tonight and bring your poetry. Bring your poetry. Would you say something about your special guest?
Yared Babu, he wrote this book, What Child Town. He was a former EPRP party member and fighter. And he wrote this book, and he is willing to visit Minnesota, and we can discuss specifically on his book and the content of his book, and have experience, share. It's our first time. Yep.
2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah.
2 weeks from tonight.
But otherwise,
So
this is our fourth event. Hopefully by
and
next.
they provide food. Yes, they do provide food. Yes.
So they
Sort
will
of.
continue.
Yes. Please, Al.
Yeah, as a wise old man, I will invoke, my privilege, And I just want to mention, our audience here, that the Horn of Africa is all, that bad. You just mentioned that. It's like any other society. It has its own ups and downs. But I want people to leave, this discussion today with what I call, 3 important things. First, East Africa is the land of, it's an old world. It's a burial of our, human ancestry in that region. You're talking about, Hadar and Lucy and everything. The second thing is a very vibrant and very diverse society. The third thing is like we have lots and lots of wildlife that the other world cannot offer. And I will add the fourth, which we hold the main marine, route to the rest of the world. If it is not for the East Africa and for the Horn itself, transportation of oil and everything, would be skyrocketing. So those are the 4 things, positive things, that I want everybody to take with.
Yeah.
Besides that, there are these smart, charming neighbors now living with us who come from that part of the world. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you all. If you have not signed the guest book, make sure you sign the guest book so that we can stay in touch with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cal, thank you very much. I know that this was not the environment that you're used to, and very helpful. Maki, thank you.